Welcome, everyone, to episode 16 of the Curious Mind podcast. Today we deal with Adlerian psychotherapy and philosophy, based on the book of two Adlerians, Fumitake Kuga and Ishiro Kishimi. Both are Japanese. Kishimi is specialized in Adlerian philosophy, and Kuga is an author who got inspired by Adlerian thought and did many interviews with Kishimi. And based on these conversations, we have two books. One, The Courage to be Disliked from 2013, and The Courage to be Happy from 2016. And based on these books, we have this conversation today. My conversation partner is Palvi. And we discuss based on these books and not so much based on Adler himself. Adler was a historical figure from the beginning of the 20th century, and I guess for most readers it's more interesting to read a contemporary take rather than to take the historical thoughts that probably seem out of date if they are read from today's perspective. Okay, enjoy the conversation. So welcome, Palvi, to our podcast episode about Adlerian psychotherapy, psychology, and philosophy. Just to mention a few words about Alfred Adler himself. He was living in Austria. He was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. It's a little bit too much said that he was a direct disciple or anything, but he was surely visiting the circles, the discussion circles that Freud invited to, which consisted of a mid-sized group of people who were very much interested in the discoveries of Freud and to enhance on them. Adler was one of the guys who, after some years, a little bit less than a decade, officially left Freud and founded his own psychoanalytic movement and organization. And Adler became famous for a couple of things. One thing that is interesting, here now we're talking about the beginning of the 20th century, the first and second decades of the 20th century, that Adler was one of the first proponents of a connection between mind and body. So this was not as common, also not kind of offensive or revolutionary in that sense. There are many allusions to a mind-body connection with Freud himself from the very beginning of psychoanalysis, but Adler emphasized it a little bit more. Adler also had an emphasis more on the societal function of psychology. So we can roughly make the distinction that while Freud was very much interested in the individual and the progress of the individual, Adler was a little bit more interested in how society can use psychology and the results of psychology to improve society. One of the strong elements in Adlerian psychology in that respect is the emphasis that Adler put on education, so child psychology, and how children should be treated and how children should be educated, which gave him a much more pragmatic spin. So that when one reads Adlerian thoughts and his books and so on, his interest is much more that people understand where he's coming from, to give them very pragmatic ideas of how, for example, to educate children and how to reform the education system, rather than, as Sigmund Freud would be, to go into the most complex details of the unconscious mind up to a level where people hardly understood what it all meant and how, how this is all connected. So Freud was much more complex in his theories. And a last distinction is that whereas for Freud, his idea was not so much to become happy, and his psychoanalysis was not in the most narrow sense psychotherapy as we understand it today. It had many more philosophical aspects. and had much more to do with a deep understanding. And Adler was very clearly on the spectrum on the side of therapy. He wanted to make people happy and to give them tools for that. So again, in this sense, the two have a quite different perspective on things and how their teachings should be dealt with and applied. Nevertheless, again, we cannot understate that the two kind of developed their thoughts in a more parallel way for about 10 years, and I'm sure that they continue to be influenced by each other, even if it was in a more antagonistic way afterwards. There are many connection points, even if they're not spelled out, and even if we don't find them explicitly, for example, in Adler's books. Okay, so far for a short introduction. There are many interesting documentaries on YouTube. The Wikipedia article is not bad, so anyone who's interested in the biographical person of Alfred Adler is welcome to read into that. I think it's always interesting to go back to the history of psychotherapy. But this is not our topic today. Today we deal much more with Adlerian psychology and philosophy, which means what was elaborated mostly by the students and followers of Adler in the many decades afterwards. So it's not so much about necessarily what the person Alfred Adler wrote, but what people developed out of his systems and techniques. And Palvi, you read into some books, you got interested into this topic. Please tell us your perspective on things and what got you into it in the first place.
Absolutely. So, Doc, the reason why I got interested was almost just like the title of the book that is written by, I can't pronounce their name, so we'll add it to the book notes, but it's Kishimi-san and Kuga-san. It's called The Courage to be Disliked. And the second book series is called The Courage to be Happy. To me, what was interesting was it's called The Courage to be Disliked, but the second line of it is to how to finally stop. It says, one second, I have to pull out in my notes.
No problem.
How to finally, I believe it says sort of how to free yourself, change your life, and achieve real happiness, right? That yes. becomes the title, which is very different. And from what I understood, and I have 2 or 3 topics that I wanted to just deep dive and understand from you about that Adlerian psychology. So the funny part about the book is both these books are written in that Greek, and you referred to it too as well, is in that Greek psychology methodology where a youth asks the question and the philosopher answers, as opposed to more the, the 19th century Freud or Jung point of view, right? Like, and I am not I haven't really read too much into Freud and Jung, well, some into Jung, but Freudian philosophy is sort of like very common, which is, your path. Like, to me, that what was very interesting about the book was Freud almost just like, and we all grew up in that thinking that, oh, if you understand your past, that really, really, that really helps you understand it, right? Like, for me, like I came to you and I was trying to, work with you, with a hypnotherapist, with all of that, and even doing things like past life regression, because I came from that mindset that if you understand your past, the future will change. Yes. And what Adler interestingly says is, oh, if you you give context to your past. If you're in a good mind or if you're in a good state, you'll be like, oh yeah, those are good experiences I had, the challenges. Whereas if you're going through a tough time, you end up saying, this was like, because my parents did this to me, or because this happened to me in my past, hence I cannot become successful, famous, whatever desires you have. And even like I myself have like, worked through some of my own past issues, I don't know how much of it to believe. Like one of the titles in the book, when they talk about Adlerian psychology, is Adler believed that like the past does not matter, right? To me, it was like a fairly infuriating statement, right? Because if someone's has been raped, or if you don't even want to go that far, you can be like, my parents always like compared me to somebody, to my older brother or older sister. Yeah. Hence, I always felt like I wasn't good. Like, how do you, what is your sort of take on, does the past matter or does it not matter? Because, there's so many different schools of thought around it.
Yes. So, just before we started the recording, we agreed that we would like to go deeply into topics. So there will be some branches to this, and I would like to get a good grip on it. In a certain way, I think it's super obvious that the past matters. There is, just on a factual level, if my parents were rich and I inherited some of the fortune, or I have access to these resources, I can do many more things. I can build companies in a different way than I could if I was poor. I have access to social strata in a different way than if I was poor. I have access to people and other resources, etc. This is not just because of the present or what I think now and so on. This is purely a result of a structural advantage that I got in the past. Similarly, if I was loved a lot, then it's just a simple concept that I would have more confidence than people who were denied any kind of love or who were not reinforced as children. So what I'm saying is that obviously the past contributes to a different starting point. Right? Exactly,
right? So that's why that was my irritation with the book itself, was the past doesn't matter. It, like, those are all the facts, that play into who you are today, right?
Yes. Now, I'm not sure how the authors of these books understood it, so we have to free float a little bit. But let's assume that there is something valid to it. So under which circumstances would it be right to say the past doesn't matter? And to me, one of the circumstances would be in a context to encourage people. If I want to encourage people, if I'm a motivational speaker, if I'm a coach, then I would like to downplay the effect of the past, because my goal is to support the individual, the person, to change and to improve whatever they do. So my goal in that sense would be to put them into a positive bubble and to brainwash them into thinking that everything is possible for them. And that in this sense, the past does not matter. I would hope that they believe me, or that I kind of put a convincing bubble around them so that they really feel encouraged and empowered, and that their next steps, their next decisions would not be guided by the limitations that de facto came from the past, but they would be much more oriented by their hopes, by their wishes, by their own goals, and what would make them happy. So here we have an interesting dynamic between past and present, right? Someone who believes that they're entirely determined by their past might dream of a positive future or whatever they would like to do in their life, but they would be held back probably by thinking that, in fact, they're very much limited by how they grew up and what they experienced in the past.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you're saying that, what you have to, like, so what you're saying is, like, in therapy, what you do is you sort of talk about, understand the past, but then you start to encourage them to live the way they want to sort of live, right? Is that what you're saying?
So yes, partly I tap into this mindset. Of course, I want to be careful not to kind of be too fantastic about it. I think
Yeah.
limitations are still there. But apart from psychology or psychotherapy, there are several contexts where actually something like this is in place. If you think about a military training, for example, it's hard to imagine that someone would say, look, Lieutenant, don't treat me too harshly. I had a rough childhood and, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That wouldn't go very well with the educators there, right?
Yeah.
The same in highly competitive companies, where the mindset would be, look, we don't care where you're coming from. You have an opportunity here. If you want to grow, you better believe in yourself and you better bring some numbers.
But it is an internal mindset, right? Like that is, and it's funny because in Adler, he just says, oh, you can just switch and you can just, you can, like, it literally is like said in multiple times in these books, is, oh, you can just choose to be happy, or you can just choose to have a different personality or an attitude in life. But how is that even possible, right? Like, take your example of that corporate, right? Like you got into a company and they don't care. They just want you to prove the numbers, be good. But it is your own mindset and your own, you have those subconscious behaviors, like, your ability to self-sabotage, or
Yes.
you feeling unconfident, not feeling confident because you have always been told you weren't good enough. How do they not play a part in it, right? Like, you cannot just tell yourself, oh, starting today, I'm not going to feel, I'm not going to, even though my parents told me that I wasn't good enough, I'm going to feel I'm good enough starting today. Even though my parent, like, how do you do that? Is that even practical or possible, is my question.
Yes, I think it's very practical, but not in an instant decision, not an instant point. It's more of a process that several people have to be committed to in order for it to work. Let's say in a company there is a mentoring system, right?
Right.
And mentors are supposed to be open to the potential of the person that they're mentoring, and to have, of course, more growth, more development in mind. They would not be interested so much in limitation. They would be very much interested in growth of the person. Okay, so they would come in with this mindset, and they would generally encourage the person. They say, look, you can do this. I've seen you for the last 1.5 years. I know what you can do. And then the person would come in with these limitations that, look, I don't know. I don't believe in myself so much. I don't know if I'm cut out for this management position that you want to push me to. Okay, and then the mentor would be kind of cunning in the way of presenting. If I was talking to you, this is what you've done in the past. Look at this. This project was fantastic. You did that. It was good. Now there's a little bit of doubt, and you're just like, maybe I can actually do that. And then I come up with, okay, you know what? I understand. Maybe you're not cut out for this. Maybe you're right. Let's try. Let's experiment in the next 3 months. Go to work in the next 3 months with a mindset that you can actually do it. Do things a little bit differently. Be more open to conversations. Allow yourself to think big. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. And if it does, then fine. Then maybe you are, after all, different than you thought. So in this kind of process, where I encourage someone to step out of their comfort zone and to make experiences that contradict my belief and my limitations, I might end up getting experiences where indeed, after all, I tell myself, okay, I thought that I was much more limited, but now I have to admit, not that I can do everything and anything, but I have to admit, yes, there's more to get for me than what I thought before.
So that actually brings us to sort of the second point in this whole Adlerian psychology that I am very unsure about is, he says, not like Adler and his disciples have all said, you should not be praising anybody. You should not obviously be rebuking anybody, but you should not praise someone else either. Because if you praise me, or if you praise, and it comes back again to what you mentioned before, which is a child psychology, right? Now you have, if you start to praise somebody or and say, you know what, you did a really great job here and you did a really great job there, you are now sort of making them dependent psychologically on yourself, right? Now they'll always look for appreciation, and the minute they get appreciation, they will be like, okay, I'm going to work harder. And the minute they aren't appreciated, they won't work harder. And I know this is like sort of my own personal problem as well, where I always need that external validation. But the question, like, to me, like, I kind of understood, like, you should encourage a child to be self-reliant and be happy. Like, if they want to, you shouldn't praise them for reading a book, because then they're just looking for the praise and not looking to learn or enjoy reading a book. Or in your scenario, the employee is going to just like work hard enough just so they can get praised. And the minute they stop getting encouragement or praises, they'll stop, they'll stop working on them, working on a project, and they'll get very demotivated and they'll go back in that loop. Now, Adler does say, so he says, don't praise and do not rebuke, obviously, but you can encourage. So now the question is, like, what's even the difference between praising and encouraging? Because to me, they both sound fairly similar.
Right. So yes, obviously there is some issue there, right? Because so much in our life depends on encouragement and reinforcement. So under which circumstances, again, does it make sense to have a philosophy like this? Let me make the comparison to alternative preschools and schools that exist, where children are not compared to each other, right? It's very liberal. Yeah. Children are getting tasks. If you want to do it, do it. Nobody tells you how to do it. In the end, everyone's the same and everyone's fine, kind of. Now, experience shows, and some friends of mine have been to such alternative schools, that only a certain type of children benefit from this. This is not for everyone. Certain kids who are driven, internally driven by their own motivation, who enjoy to discover things, to find things out, who enjoy to do things their own way, they benefit from such an environment. Others who, for whatever reason, be it the environment of their first years and how they grew up with their parents, or because they're so disposed for other reasons, they don't. They're lazy. They don't feel encouraged. They don't feel motivated, and they end up learning much, much less because they don't have this inner driving force. Or they need much more structure, So they would need at least some hints of how to do things, or they would need to be told, do it until then, or do it like this, and so on. So, in different degrees, they would need some support and structure and encouragement from the outside. And for them, a more kind of normal school environment is better suited.
So that's interesting, because I do feel like many people would be in that second category where, they're just not internally motivated. So what even makes both of, like, Adler believes that everybody would be internally motivated, or,
Yes.
and would figure it out. But like, what makes one person be internally motivated and another not be internally motivated at all, or want to do it, but not do it, right? Like,
yeah. So such an attitude for me is too philosophical and not reality-based. I worked for a couple of years as a social worker. I don't know if I've mentioned that.
No.
And I worked with young adults who had major psychological issues. And we worked with the premise that everyone can change. Everyone can become rehabilitated. Everyone can have a simple job and provide for themselves and at least grow, in responsibility and so on. Yes, but some people need a lot more work for that. A lot more work and investment, physical investment. Like, it needs a lot of money for the country to support endeavors like this in the social system. And others obviously don't need encouragement at all. Like, they In other cases,
Mm-hmm.
the state doesn't have to worry about the development of people because they do it themselves. So while philosophically, I would say, yes, it's probably true that everyone can be theoretically self-determined and self-motivated and so on. But in practice, what we as parents, adults, educators would have to pull off to bring that child, that individual who is not so inclined, to that state of self-determination, it's just, it's not feasible, on a pragmatic level. At some point, the people in charge of the resources will have to cap it and say, we're fine with how things are. Like, he will survive, she will survive, it's fine. We don't have to make them the most fully liberated, self-determined person. So this is where I think the pragmatics kind of bring a limitation to this kind of mindset.
So that's interesting, right? So in Adler, in these books, especially the second one, they give the story about how Adler, there's this woman who had been sort of like sent to a mental institution in Austria, where she was literally acting like a dog, right? Like barking, biting people, like snatching at them, etc. And like all Adler sort of did was like respected her as an individual and believed in her and acted like their friend, and then apparently, like, somehow through the counseling sessions, through very intense, he did say, there were intense counseling sessions of
Yes.
like a couple weeks, she became entirely self-reliant, and nobody would even know, looking at her, that like she had been acting so bizarrely. And in Adler, he talks about, oh, you just need to, as a human being, you need to realize that you as a human being, even if you are just sitting in your room and doing nothing at all, you're still contributing to the society. To me, that part was weird. And then coming back to your point of view of, motivating or unmotivating, like, it's that internal voice for, like, I think I kind of agree with you, and I don't agree with the Adlerian psychology that, oh, you can just, you can just sort of like, you can choose to just love yourself and give love to people. And just by giving love the way Mother Teresa said it and all of that, like, you can just choose to start loving other people, but you also need to simultaneously just build a belief system that you are needed in this world, and you're contributing by just even breathing and just living and not doing anything else, just sitting in a room, and you're still contributing to the world. And that is good enough, but you need to build that belief system, and that's what counselors are supposed to do.
Yes. So
And
it's
to
very
me, that was,
idealistic, right, in that sense?
yeah, fairly idealistic, because to me, okay, I do understand that, and the way he explained it was, even if you're just sitting in a room all depressed, not meeting people, not doing anything, and if you think that you don't have any value, you actually do, because you go to the grocery store and you provide, you're helping the employee at the grocery store make money, and which is sort of like helping that entire logistics chain. So there's like, even if you're not connected to the world, you are kind of connected. Which is kind of interesting to me, because I generally am of the opposite belief system, which is, if you're not contributing significantly, are you even, I believe you don't even need to exist, kind of thing. But that he said that, like, every human being sort of like just because they're born is sort of like contributing to the world, and they should have that belief system internally. And theoretically, I kind of like what he said, right? Like, it sort of like resonated deeply. But do you agree with that? Like, would that kind of thinking, like, how do you make that kind of thinking stick in someone's head?
Well, my question would be, for whom is this message meant? Is it for the people who are just depressed at home and leave once a week to go out to the groceries and to support the economic system a little bit like that? Are these the people who are supposed to buy it, that they are contributing to society and they're valuable people. To me, it sounds like a political message for the people who are fortunate, not to look down on those who are not, and to continue to encourage them and to continue to have kind of a positive mindset towards them and so on. Because if I would be depressed at home and someone came to me and told me, look, you're a valuable person, like no matter what you do, still you somehow contribute, I would think it's very condescending and, you know, bullshitting. I would not buy it. I mean, maybe I already believe it, and I don't need to hear it, right? But if I was depressed, I would not, this would not be for me a convincing attitude, because society is not like this. I just have to turn on TV or internet. Like, who are the people who are praised? The people who stay at home and are depressed? No, this is not the image that I get.
Exactly.
The image that I get is like the people who found the billion-dollar companies, who all look beautiful, who seem to have no issues, the Instagram models and so on. This is, so from the millions of voices that carry this message, then there is one person, or, you know, kind of a depression self-help group where these kind of messages, the positive messages that are worthy, where this kind of messages are spread. Now, again, I'm not saying what is true or not, which is almost a pointless philosophical point for me. I'm not really interested in the truth of something, but what is this message for? Who can use it? In the end, someone is addressed by it, and I don't understand exactly who. Because in my experience, this, for a few people, maybe this would be a working psychotherapeutic attitude. Right. But in most cases, I think that at least a different therapeutic procedure of getting out of the depression and becoming more active and taking care of oneself and so on is more promising.
Yes, but how, like, sort of like the question then becomes, like, how do you, like, in the book, it talks about, like, you know, you are sort of like, you contribute to the world, right? Like that feeling of contribution is sort of just by that existence of that example that I said. But like, and that is what leads you to sort of happiness, right?
Okay, but again, please answer me the question, who do you think is this message for?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, it is more for that individual, like, you know, the very much that Western world, like first world problem of somebody who has all the money and he's just like, you know, I think of it as like Rockefeller's great grandchildren sitting in their room and wondering, oh, I don't add any value. I have so much money. I don't even need to work. What should I be doing? To them, just the fact that they're existing, and they have, like, you know, people helping them and the people that they pay salaries for, to them maybe that philosophy will work.
And I would add, for example, middle class families where my kid comes home and says, oh, there's a new kid in class and he's poor and he stinks, I don't like him, I wish he would go away, this kind of thing. And then I would come in with my educational attitude and like, look, everyone is worthy, you shouldn't look down on other people, everyone contributes in some way. You know, it would be kind of a nice
but would that kid be impressed, right? Like, if I'm that teenager who's talking about that poor kid in the class who's stinking, I'd be like, why is that kid worthy? I don't think that kid's worthy, right? Like, just because you're saying it's worthy, like, how do you imbibe in kids or even in adults that feeling that, oh yeah, everyone around me is worthy?
Yes. Well, this is a complex process which goes back to when you introduced the second point of reinforcement and encouragement and so on. Because one of the processes is not necessarily that I become dependent on the praise. One of the ideas, one of my hopes as an educator and parent is that my praise gets internalized and that the kids does it not because I praise the kid for reading a book, but because the kid starts to praise itself for reading a book.
And that's what he said,
sorry.
Yeah, like that's the whole psychology behind praising is eventually it'll get internalized, but Adler says that should not be done at all because the kid needs to get that voice internally. And you're saying like some people will never have that internal drive or
Yes, yes. And let's go a little bit further there. What would be negative about such a process of having an internalized voice of praise? Obviously, the good thing is that it frees me as a parent to constantly reinforce, right? So it
yeah.
does not get into this dependency. But what would be a negative? Why to discourage from such a process?
I think then you have now a person who is very much like, oh, I know what I'm doing and I'm very happy with what I'm doing. And they're just like, the self-satisfied weirdos that sometimes we run against, like who are unable to learn because they are just like, oh yeah, I know everything. And I've worked on this for like the past, like at work, you find these people, right? Or like, I've worked on this thing for the past 15 years, hence I'm an expert. Hence, I'm not going to learn anything new, right? Because they've internalized the thing that they're very satisfied internally from where they are in life.
Yes. So they're a little bit too satisfied. They're too complacent about how much they should be open. To me, from my work, I see a potential big problem there. When kids are encouraged to do something, then internalize it, and then it becomes a rigid formula for feeling good. So if I, as your parent, encourage you to study and learn, right, to be successful in school and so on, and that would get internalized in a relatively rigid way. What I mean with rigid is that whenever you feel uncomfortable, your go-to way to feel good again with yourself is you would pick up a skill and learn something.
Right. And that would make you feel good.
Okay, possibly, but it has its limitation. That's the thing. So if, for example, there are some things that we existentially need, for example, friendship and relationship and intimacy, right? Now, I would raise you in a rather secluded way, so you wouldn't have great social skills. And you would comfort yourself with skill development and reading. And because of that, you would be very social situations and partnership stuff and so on would be so uncomfortable that you, with years, would get much less experience with that than other kids. So kids obviously have a learning curve there, and you have to go through some horrible experiences, unfortunately, in your puberty and your early adulthood, so that eventually you know a little bit of what to do with yourself and how to deal in relationships. So you have to go through this discomfort, right? But if the way that I raised you would effectively prohibit you to go through this discomfort, because each time when you feel lonely or you feel uncomfortable, you would again learn something, then you might end up as a 25, 30-year-old without prior experience in relationship, being great at skills, but not knowing what to do with this existential part of yourself that cannot be compensated, where, part of your mind body screams that you finally want to be loved and to love someone and be in a relationship. So you know that, but it seems, like the gap seems unbridgeable. So because none of the skills that you have, because your default mode is kind of learning and skill building, right? And so this rigidity, this for me, what I see kind of as practical limitations. Or when you get, when I am a difficult parent, right? Let's say I'm a loud alcoholic father, right? You would learn a very specific approach of how to avoid trouble, which is often to be quiet, especially as a girl, to be quiet and to disappear, right? Now you get into relationships, and as an adult, you have at your hand, and you should have at your hand, a versatility of tools to sometimes be quiet, sometimes give in and compromise, to sometimes stand up for yourself, to sometimes be proactive. Like all these things should be there to have a good relationship, but because of your past, because of circumstances, encouraged you to pursue a very specific style when it comes to stress, which is to be quiet and to disappear. You would not have those more active tools available to you.
Right.
So, and this would be a direct effect of a very specific reinforcement, praisal, and encouragement as a kid.
Which is very interesting because, like, sort of like the other topic that he did mention around that fact was, like somewhere around the age of 10, he said, like, you sort of form that personality that you live with, like that most people live with throughout their life, right? Like you said, right? Like that kid who has a loud, abusive father, the girl child decides to become more quiet and withdraw and just uses that tool throughout their life. What he says is, at any given moment, right? Like as you grow up, you can just choose to say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to be held bound by that, and I'm going to just choose my new personality. And we can determine our, like the line that I think he said was, we can determine our lives according to the meaning we give to the past experiences, and we can sort of change that attitude immediately. We can just say, you know what, from now on, I'm not going to let that behavior drive me anymore, and I'll just change. And to me, that did not really resonate, because if there's a tool around, oh, let me now try to engage or speak up, if I have never practiced or done that tool, it'll be very tough for me to just suddenly say, oh yeah, sure, I'm gonna, like, that tool isn't even on my radar, right? Like, to me, that was fairly annoying about this whole system. And then the question sort of becomes, is like, how do you know what is the right tool, right? Like, what is the right mindset? And in Adler, he obviously didn't, like, they didn't, like, these are like two big books that you end up reading, and you end up thinking about, but they never talk about how do you know what's the right thought process, right? Like, what is the right tool to use in a particular situation? Or if what you're thinking of is even the right thing to think of, right? So an example that I had was, people kids in US in their 20s and 30s, they have a very different mindset, right? Like they're moved to New York City, their parents come and visit, and they'll come stay in a hotel, and they'll just go spend a couple hours with them. They'll spend perhaps a full day. Their parents will buy them food or whatever, right? Like it's a very much like the parents are going to go stay in a hotel, not going to stay with you. Whereas in India, like I come from India, and in India, when my parents come and visit, they're going to stay for 6 months. And there's no question that they're going to stay in a hotel. They're going to stay in my house, and they expect to be close to me 24/7. And neither do I agree with that whole Western and the US or the American way of saying that, oh, my parents need to now stay in a hotel, and just like, we're going to stay as guests. But neither do I like the traditional Indian mindset either, because that's also not sitting well. But I don't know what the right answer is, right? Like, how do you use that new person thinking or that new way and say, okay, I am going to, just use something else altogether. Whereas that, like, there's going to be pushback with the people you've lived with, right? Your parents, your family, etc. That he never really answers in the book. And just choosing a new personality or choosing to be happy, to me, that is something that is, I do not agree with, kind of, and I'm not sure how it even works, or does it even make sense?
Yes. But to me, it sounds to me inspirational. It's not to be meant to be a guideline of how to actually achieve this, but rather to open up the possibility that this is somehow possible. And that then, as an individual, I go on the journey to find out how it's possible for me. But that this is not provided by them. They sound much more philosophically minded than processually, psychologically, so that they would show a path of, okay, this is how you start, and at the beginning you will get to these obstacles, In the middle, you will get to different obstacles, and then the highest obstacles are these, and this is how you deal with them. So it's not processual in that sense. And obviously, the question that you raised, for example, in such mixed culture circumstances, where not only are you a modern Indian descent woman, but living in the US with your family fairly spread out over the continents. So how to deal with that? Well, for such a complex thing, how can you imagine that you will find the answer in a book? You won't. So a book like that, at best, can give you maybe the inspirations like, yes, damn it, they're right. There must be a better way for me. There must be a way for me to reinvent myself so that I'm not just stuck with the expectations of my parents or the overly distant formula of the West that it provides. There must be something that just fits for me very well. Right? I want to be happy. Like when the books say you can choose to be happy, then I can take this as the starting point. Yes, I want to be happy. Right?
Yeah.
Then it comes to the question of how. Right? And this how is a very specific thing, highly specific, which does not mean much except for you have to try. You have to think and you have to try. You will not figure it out entirely by books. Maybe you will have good ideas, but unless it's a book that is specifically written for you and you're very rich, it will be a mixture of tools that somehow prove to be interesting or effective. So what we do as the process is we do take these books, we read them, we go to therapy, we go to counselors, we watch YouTube videos and inspirational talks, and we start to implement small things to see how they work. We get discouraged if they don't work at all. There's a lot of backlash, and we get encouraged when we see that we can fairly nicely implement it and that the environment reacts with maybe a little bit of irritation that we do something different, but largely they seem to accept it. Then I'm encouraged to go on in this direction. So there's a lot of miss and hit there, hit and miss, and there's a lot of trial and error. And in the end, I hope that because I try diverse things and I continue to be confident, and this is again where the inspirational aspect of these kind of books come in, I don't let kind of misfortune discourage me. I'm stubbornly insisting on my right to be happy, and that somehow it could and should be done. With this force, I continue to experiment, I continue to evaluate. And eventually, with such an open-mindedness and a courage to continue to try new things, I will, in comparison with someone who is much more timid, of course, with time, I will amass so many more tools that I have experience with and work more or less. The other person who does not believe that they have the right to be happy, who does not believe that they can change themselves, they will naturally, as a result of this kind of mindset, they will try much, much less and will be at the whims of fate. You know, they might meet a great friend and then that was luck. The friend encouraged them and they will find something new. The proactive person with a kind of inspirational mindset just has a much higher probability to actually stumble upon those things that makes them a little bit happier, or in the end quite much happier.
But so that's actually interesting, because he does like sort of say that, you know, like you have to have you said, like, you know, that mentality or that want to continue trying to be happy, right? And he uses the word the courage to be happy. And he does sort of like mention that, you know, you need to be self-reliant in a way that, like, you need to say to yourself, you need to stop expecting others to love you, right? Like, you need to stop expecting your parents, like, nobody's going to love you like your mother, right? Like, he gives that example, even though, you know, not everybody has like a super loving mother, but like, you need to say to yourself that, oh, I need to love myself, right? Like, you need to love your own self, and then you choose the life to be happy, and you say, okay, I'm going to continue trying, and like you said, right? Like in that way, amass yourself. But how do you build that? Like I keep coming back to that same thing. Is like, how do you build that voice in your head or that mindset to say, okay, I'm going to love myself, right? Like, and how do you choose that? Like, to me, that is the part that I don't think either the book or I have still understood. Is how do you say, okay, you know what, I do love myself, I do wish well upon myself, right? Like, even though I'm not perfect, or even though I have like 10 like I have an inferiority complex, and
Yes.
I have all these different issues. That in the book, he talks about just sort of like, choosing to do it, which kind of like really irritated me. But how would you recommend like people go about just saying, okay, you know what, I am going to choose to like try and go on this route?
Again, this is very difficult. It depends on where the person is, right? Some people are fortunate / unfortunate that they are at the point where they have nothing more to lose. And for some of these, now this is not kind of a guaranteed path, but some of these who are in such a desperate situation, for them, a flip like this happens. They would have thoughts like, what am I afraid of? I'm already ridiculed. I'm already alone. I already have no job.
Yeah, the people who hit like rock bottom.
Yes, they hit rock bottom. It's like, okay, I have nothing else to lose. And I'm not even interested in any part of my personality anymore. I don't care. Nothing of this means anything to me anymore. So they have a mental readiness of dispassion, of not holding on, of not being attached to parts of their personality or parts of their biography. In their mind, everything that they went through is just shit, and they're not interested in it anymore, which might, under certain circumstances, open up a window of, okay, everything past, gone. I'm just interested in the now, no bullshit anymore, and so on, right? For most people, they're too weak when they're very desperate. They cannot achieve this. But for some people, it works. And if you read books like Eckhart Tolle, for example, he was a case like that, right? There are other people who are by far not so bad, in such a bad state. They have many more resources at hand, and they would come to a conclusion like this through much more observation. They might be middle class. They might be guided through the limitations of their life. Then they go to a workshop and they hear stories of kind of real people, not YouTube inspirational stuff that is making me suspicious anyhow, if it's real or not. But I go to a workshop, let's say, a women workshop, and then there's a woman's like, look, this is what my life was like, and I recognize, oh, this is where I am. And then I realized the relationship is not right for me, so I divorced from my husband, and it's like, oh, I'm in a bad relationship. I never thought I could allow myself these thoughts of divorcing. And since I'm divorced, the other woman continues, I continued to be good to myself and to live the life that I want to live, and so on. Okay, and I have such an experience. I go home, it's like, oh man, this is a real person. And it never occurred to me that I could do something like this, like this courage. And then I sit with it for a while, and it starts to grow like a positive tumor inside of me until it cannot be denied anymore. It's like, I have to do this. Where was this coming from? Through an inspirational, real, convincing encounter with another person, with a blueprint that seems so relatable to me that it has an immediate effect that I cannot forget. So this is, I think something like this is more likely, and it's based on real encounters that we have in life that can truly inspire us. It doesn't have to be in such a big way, but just that makes me understand, why am I limiting myself like this? Such a big world out there, and I can do so much more than what I have done. Why do I settle for the unhappiness that I've been going through? So this would be much more common. Now, if people go to therapy or counseling or something, that has, unfortunately, the touch of being fake, right?
Right.
Because I go to someone and I pay them to tell me what to do, and this immediately taints the situation. So I cannot fully take them for seriously in what they say,
Right.
because I think that, well, okay, it's their job. They don't really like me, maybe they like me, but they partly like me because of my job. They talk to me because of their job. So,
because I'm paying them, yeah.
yes, which is why in a therapeutic relationship, trust is so important, and which is why for me it's so important not to, cuddle too much my clients. That I give them a lot of kind of honest feedback.
Yeah, you don't cuddle at all. I am
Not at all.
Definitely, yeah. In the beginning, you were nice, but then you stopped being nice. So
yes, which has its downside, but at least I think it adds more authenticity, and people might take a little bit more seriously the things that I do recommend, or when I do give positive feedback, it gives it a different light. So maybe these are three contexts that, again, I cannot take as kind of a path for myself, but these are things that I've encountered to hit rock bottom. Second, to have an authentic encounter with people who went through something similar that I'm going through, and who show me with their development of a path that I can emulate somehow, or to get professional help.
Okay. That I think that makes sense. Perfect. So do we want to continue? I have one or two more topics, so do we want to move it to another podcast?
I think we should move it to another podcast, but I'm interested to wrap it up with you. How do you view our discussion on topics, your open questions that you had? How do you think about them now, and what is your stand on the Adlerian, maybe let's call it attitude, and not so much therapy or philosophy?
I think to me, some parts of the Adlerian psychology did resonate with my work with you, right? Which was sort of having the courage, or like he's using the word courage, so I've started using the word courage, but like wishing you always use the term that, do you really wish yourself well, right? Like, which is saying, okay, I am going to try, and what has happened in the past is not working anymore, and the tools that I had in the past that I was using to deal with my life stopped working at some point, and now I'm going to try and use a couple different ways, and I'm going to wish myself well, or like, have the courage to be happy and say, okay, I'm going to try and do other things, and I'm going to try and become more positive or more better. Like, to me, that part I kind like, I think this discussion definitely helped, right? Like, for me to think through and say, okay, I do need to go on that journey, even if it will take me like a long time. And I think I kind of agree with you. It's like, you can't, like, I finally understood when he said, okay, just choose a new personality. And to me, that just sounded like bullshit. To me, this, saying that, okay, I'm going to go on that path and like build a couple tools along the way, to me, that sounds more of a, like, I think that is what Adler meant, right? Like, to just stopping with that whole, stop saying that, okay, I'm going to stop using those tool sets and like try a new life. To me, that definitely, absolutely makes sense. Yeah. So this was really helpful. Thanks, Doc.
And what are some open questions or something that you're still not satisfied with?
So something, I think, like, the one part that I'm still not sure is, and maybe we can do a deeper dive around it, is in the book he talks about inferiority complex, and I obviously very well resonated with that, and you and I have been working on. talking about how do you wish yourself well or love yourself well, and I'm still not sure how to do that, right? Like, what are the tools that you would give to your listeners and to your patients? Like, how do you start to just, if you don't like yourself, but how do you wish yourself well and say, oh, okay, you know what, let me at least not hate different aspects of myself, right? Like, just move from that hate to, okay, I wish myself well, even though I do not like 3 or 4 or 5 different things about myself. What was really interesting to me, and I'm going back to your question, is what was something that, you know, was made clear was this kind of thinking and saying, oh, you just need to not encourage people and all, may actually work for some students, may not, or some people may not work for others, right? Because, you know, at work, you have a full team of people. And the way I've been always approaching them is, good job, like, you know, really encouraging them. And to me, like, what was funny in the book was he said, like, oh, you're just creating more vertical relationships and putting people down and saying, oh, you're beneath me, which is why I'm encouraged, like giving yourself praise. But actually it depends on the person, right? Like, if some people may thrive by me just encouraging and praising, and some may not, right? So like trying to like understanding that it's not that whole black and white scenario of doing one thing for someone and all.
Yes.
So that was definitely very helpful.
And just to add on this thing before we end, it's kind of misleading to put so much stress on personal encouragement, especially in the work life, in the work context, because companies have much more efficient ways to educate people, which is through promotion and through salary. So we can skip the whole, you did a nice job. If at the end of the year you get the promotion and you get a raise of 15%, I don't have to add any verbal level to it. And the person would still feel rewarded and encouraged. And get something like this is systemically how the workplace, how industry kind of praises people. In fact, I would argue I don't care much if my boss tells me how great I did, but then doesn't follow up on it with salary and reputation.
Well, you would think that, but a lot of us thrive in the corporate environment with more. I didn't care whether I was getting, like, you know, of course the money mattered and all, but to me that verbal praise or that verbal appreciation was way more valuable than, you know, another, like, you know, like more in my salary, right? Like, yes, that was at the end of the year was like one data point, but like that continuous praise, and it is kind of sad to think that, like, I don't have that, you know, you don't have that internal voice that says I'm good enough for, and all of that, right? Like, you need that constant validation, which is a whole different, I think, pain point. But yes,
interesting. So but it shows again how different people are. Okay, thank you very much for this. I think we should follow it up. Maybe in the meantime, you will have developed different thoughts on what we already spoke about, but for sure we have some other topics that we didn't touch today. And at least Adler and Adlerian thought proves interesting as starting points for conversations like these.
Thanks everyone for listening. As you can see, Adlerian thought proves to be quite consequential for our time today. It was inspirational back in the days, and it has influenced positive psychology and inspirational psychology throughout the 20th, and as we can see also in the 21st century. So we decided to do a second episode where we will continue to deal with some other thoughts of Adlerian psychology that we have not touched in this conversation. And I will upload the second episode in the following weeks.